Welcome back to Old School Sports and happy OOTP 25 release day. Another video here. We're calling them tutorial videos, but really they're more first look at some of the new features of the game. I'll share my initial impressions, show some of you the screens if you haven't looked that closely at what's out on the OOTP website or other videos at this point, and hopefully help inform your decision as to whether the new version of the game is something you want to play. And in this episode, we're going to dig into the new player development features, two pretty significant enhancements to player development in OOTP 25 that I have been looking at a bit. One thing I did notice, and maybe this is just a coincidence or maybe it's a change, but in the new version, I believe there are now 550 gradations for different ratings as opposed to the 250 that were in the game before. I think I'm quoting those numbers right. It's something in that general area, which should allow there to be a lot more nuance in the game as far as player ratings, which should be positive. When I look here at Garrett Cole, 60 stuff, 55 movement, with similar ratings on his home runs allowed and his expected player BABIP in 65 control. Those ratings kind of probably what I'd expect for Garrett Cole, maybe a little low given that he was a Cy Young Award winner last year at 12 and 16 with a 4.44 ERA. I've got to change some of my screens here to the way that I'm more familiar at looking at it. But with a 4.44 ERA this year, it looks like Cole may be regressing relatively quickly now that he's 34 years old, at least in this run of the game. But as a Yankees fan, I guess I should just be happy that he was able to pitch 34 games in this mythical 2024 season that I just simmed through very quickly, because he's certainly not going to do that in the real world. But anyways, back to his 60 stuff. When we get in and we look at Cole's pitches, he's got a 55 passed ball, a 50 slider, 45 on his curve and his changeup, and 40 on his cutter. Based on my previous experience with the game, I would not expect a pitching profile like that to add up to 60 stuff. So that's a little different to me. If you've got any thoughts on what might be going on, or if you know the answer on what's going on there, would love to hear it in the comments down below. My only hunch is that maybe a pitcher with, say, a 4, 5, or 6 pitch arsenal in the latest version of the game is kind of getting more of a boost to their stuff from the diversity and the multitude of pitches that they throw than possibly they did in the past. But those numbers really don't line up for me. Just one observation. Interested if people have thoughts on what to do, what the explanation is for that. Scouting accuracy I can have is turned on to 100% here. Not really playing the game, more just looking at the new features. And speaking of the new features, we'll jump into the first development feature. Go to the player development tab, and you can see here that you can issue a developmental training plan for Garrett Cole. They kind of have a wide variety of sliders here where you can work on movement, control, stamina, and then stuff on any and all pitches that the pitcher has available to them. As it starts out, you have nothing available. All the sliders are completely filled. Let's say that taking a look at Cole's ratings, I decided I just don't care about that cutter anymore. It's a 40 out of 40 pitch. So I could take all of these points that he's putting into his cutter off, and then I can potentially use these points to work on his movement a little bit more, control. Let's boost up his stamina, and then put a few points into all of his other pitches that I think are going to be more significant. You can see it looks like maybe those initial points and stuff are pretty valuable, because I'm definitely moving these sliders up here pretty significantly on Cole. So it's going to be interesting to learn more about how this works and the different trade-offs involved. You can always also click just to ask the AI to set up the development focus, and then it looks like they'll put it back to the default that it was at before. It's going to, I think, take some time for me and probably you and others who play the game to figure out what, if any, impact these sliders have on player development. Are they more important in just kind of maintaining what veterans currently have, or can you actually, move forward if you were to cut a bunch of things way down and invest incredibly heavily in Garrett Cole's control and his movement? Can he actually make improvements to those ratings? I would be surprised if he could at the age of 34. That would be a little bit unrealistic to me. I think this is probably more of a feature that just kind of helps maintain current ratings, slow down deterioration, depending on how you're investing these points. So it's going to be something really interesting to learn. I don't have a lot of answers going forward. As I said, this is more of a first look video for those of you who haven't seen these things before. And since I'm on Steam rather than part of the public beta that's been out for the last couple of days, this is my first time seeing these things for myself as well. Similarly, for the position players, BABIP and avoid strikeouts, which go into your contact rating, gap, power, eye, running, and defense are all the things that you can work on. Everyone does have an initial AI development focus. You can see Stanton directing his efforts in practice heavily towards his power. So I don't really have too much more to say on this feature. It's going to be interesting to play around with, but I think it's going to be something that you're going to have to play around with the settings, take a look at players over time, and kind of follow the AI plans, and then also do some plans where you're really investing very heavily in some areas and ignoring some areas to give it a better sense of what impact this will or won't have on player ratings, whether there can be improvements, whether the rate at which ratings decline for older players. Interesting feature, but it's a blank slate as far as my understanding of it here, just a few hours into owning this game. And one final look at the development tab on the card for the youngster Jason Dominguez. Again, a different type of setup for him based on where the AI thinks he should be investing his time with the coaches in development and training. I think my inclination is probably to just go with the AI defaults more often than not. As I said, I will be exploring offline what changes mean to try to understand this better, and certainly will share thoughts in a subsequent video when I understand it better. I think right now, if I was starting a season at square one for probably 90% of the players, I would just go with the AI development focus. There is an opportunity to set this up for everyone in your system, so you can go down into the minors for everybody as well, depending on how much you want to be involved. I think particularly for the minor league players, unless someone is a real top-end prospect, my inclination is probably to just have the AI development focuses set up and see how they go. To me, what I think is the more interesting and potentially more impactful development enhancement is the Player Development Lab. And to get there from your team home screen, click on Player Development, and you can see the familiar player development page here. And then there's the new tab to go into your development lab. And since we've simmed ahead to the start of the off season here today, our development lab is open. It is populated. It doesn't necessarily seem like it has been incredibly intelligently populated to me. You see here we've got a third baseman, Horbit Vivas, and we've got him in a 3 to 4 month program to work on running mechanics. I don't know that he's really one of the 6 players in my system that I would focus on. Edgar Barclay 26-year-old working on adding another pitch to his arsenal. Same thing with Luis Gil. Brandon Lockridge, another guy working on his running mechanics. He's already pretty fast. He's 27 years old. He's split the last couple of seasons between AA Somerset and AAA Scranton, and he's going to be 28 before the start of spring training. I'm pretty sure if it was up to me, he's probably not going to be one of the 6 players that I'm investing in. Carlos Rodon, on the other hand, looking to increase his velocity. That may be tricky to do at almost 32 years old, but for a guy who is still signed for 4 more years after this one with the Yankees, he would certainly be the type of guy that I would consider investing in at the major league level. As the offseason moves on, I think we'll see these under assessment progress nodes change. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep in a few of these. I'm definitely going to keep in the Rodon one, but I'm going to add in a few other development complexes to the ones with players that I just don't think are a significant part of our future to experiment a little more. So we'll knock Brandon Lockridge out, and you can see that's going to open up a spot for us here. If you were wondering, and again, I'll try to feel my way through the game settings here, there is a way to change the number of development slots that you have open. And to get there, you go to the game settings and then the players and team settings, and you can see here the development lab size. It defaults to 6, but you could have as many as 20 slots if you want to spend even more time developing and customizing your players in a specific way. I think for the near term, as I'm learning the game, I'm just going to default to the normal 6, but I guess in theory it might make sense as I'm running a test here to actually do a whole bunch of them. So I actually am reconsidering that. I'm not going to put you through the torture of me picking out all 20 that I'm going to run, but it probably does make sense to run 20 of them here, since the whole point is to learn something about how these things work over the course of an off season. So back to the player development lab. Since I had taken the one out, I'm going to actually now, since I've bumped it to 20 slots, keep the other 5 that the game had recommended in there. But I'm going to manually fill the rest of the complex with 15 plans that I think are interesting. I'll talk through those shortly, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask my scout for scouting reports on all 20 players in the development lab, and then when they get done with this off-season of potential development, we'll run updated scouting reports again. Actually, we don't need to do that because I'm not using scouting and everything is at 100% scouting accuracy. So I'm thinking too much about traditionally playing the game rather than the way that I have things set up to make it very efficient to find out what's working and what's not. But I actually do still want updated scouting reports now, and then to see what these players look like at the end. So even though there's 100% accuracy, I think I'm still going to ask for the reports. So given that we were talking about Garrett Cole, and he's opted into his contract, and he seems to be regressing, so he would be a good player for us to think about some potential development plan within the lab. So we click on the plus button here, and that opens up all of our different options. You can see there's some relatively easy ones in terms of their difficulty: improving a secondary pitch, pitcher defense bunting drills, improving his control and pitch movement are medium difficulty, strength and conditioning, the overall pitch arsenal, velocity and endurance training are hard difficulty for Cole, and then adding an entirely new pitch to his arsenal is very hard. And presumably these colors here, as far as the difficulty, line up with these colors as far as the program. So I'm going to work on secondary pitch improvement for Cole, utilizing pitch tracking to evaluate the pitch's spin rate, efficiency, release point drop, and more. make their necessary changes to the grip mechanics and usage of the pitch. Pitch will immediately become a more effective weapon for them, and they'll have a better feel for it, allowing room for future refinement on their own. So this sounds like a good one to test with Cole, simply because it's easy difficulty. Just kind of want to see how easy the progress can be. And you can also see there's an opportunity to display programs that cannot be completed before the season starts. It looks like in the case of Cole, there's nothing that fits the bill there. They probably do have it set up so every program, if you start here at the beginning of the off season, can be completed. My assumption is that with some of the shorter programs, when those roll off, I assume that maybe you can slot somebody else in to do one of these quicker weekly programs at that point. But maybe it's just you get 20 slots, and whether or not you use an easy, quick one or a more difficult, longer one, you just can use the slot once. Don't know the answer, but I'll find out shortly. So we're going to select the secondary pitch improvement for Mr. Cole, and I'll do a few others as well. Since if you watched our previous video earlier today on the trade settings and trade difficulty in OOTP 25, you would have noticed that Giancarlo Stanton is very difficult to trade. We're going to select strength, and I believe that should say conditioning. Would love to get him into better shape. Intent is to prevent injury, but there may be additional benefits as well. So that seems like something logical to put Stanton on, given that we're likely to have him on our team for many years to come. Volpe suffered an Achilles injury. I was wondering whether players who are injured would be available, and it doesn't look like they can. That doesn't shock me. I thought that I figured that guys who were injured wouldn't be able to. Same thing with LeMahieu, not eligible for training programs. But if we do have players on some shorter programs, which we don't have right now, I'm going to make sure to throw some of those in there because maybe if you can reload after the initial program is finished, might be an opportunity to get a little training for Mr. Volpe after he missed a good chunk of the season. An interesting feature here with Arson Judge, I clicked to perhaps try to improve his two-strike approach and got a note here that he's already kind of at his peak in that aspect of the game. It's possible that he'll further his potential, but it's likely that he's not going to get much out of this training. So that is a very good heads up, probably not the area that we're going to focus. Since he's also fragile at this point, I think we'll select strength and conditioning for him as well. And one of the training techniques, or programs more accurately, that there's been some talk on the message boards on has been the learn new position. And there's been some people who are kind of down on this one because it's generically designed to teach the player a new position, but you don't actually say what position it's going to be. In the case of Cabrera, he's a utility guy, so I would assume that just looking at what he has in his arsenal already, it kind of has to be first base or center field. I think it would be pretty unlikely that it would be catcher. At only 5'10", I'd kind of prefer that maybe he works on center field. My hunch is it might be first base because that's probably a little more natural place for someone who's a natural infielder to go. Another program that's not going to take very long, and they do defensive drills to increase their skill and comfort at the given position, and this is still something that you can force start players at different positions when they're in the minors or in spring training or even at the majors if you so desire, to help them learn new positions and improve their ability to play those positions. So this is more just a way for kind of a random new position and some potential defensive enhancements to take place. And I like this here. I'm noticing with a lot of my pitchers that when I try to improve their control, I get the pop up that they're kind of already at their peak. And when I try to improve their movement, same thing. They're kind of already at their peak, which is good. I don't think in most cases you should just be magically able to add 5 points or even a point or two to those kind of ratings. So I think the game kind of prompts you and lets you know, hey, you can try this if you want, but it's unlikely to result in very much because the player's kind of at their peak. I am going to throw a couple of those in there just to see what happens, but probably not something you should be spending every slot on. And I've started to look at some of our better prospects in the system to invest some of the final spots I have available in. I think in a real game, I probably would do a little less with some of the established major leaguers and probably more with some of my prospects. Julio Luna, one of the better prospects that we have, and one thing that I think is useful to think about when making the decisions of who to invest in. He's got high work ethic. I think players with high work ethic and I think players with more adaptability have a chance at being more successful in some of these programs. So I think that's something to think about. That being said, if you've got a guy who's got tons of potential and a low work ethic, it still probably is going to make sense to me to send him to the development lab. You drafted them knowing, if you have the player personalities on to see, that they didn't have a high work ethic. So by kind of forcing them into a program over the winter, hopefully you're going to maximize your chances of eventually getting as much out of them as possible. That said, there are times when these training programs can go bad, and I think it sounds like it's a relatively rare outcome, but it does seem like there's some situations where things aren't going to go that well in the player development lab for people, and you may not be pleased with the results. So I've got 20 player development lab programs set now, and went to scout the players, and apparently our scout, Damon Oppenheimer, just retired at the end of this season. So I'm looking to try to hire a new scout very quickly. Once I have that new scout on board, I'll request updated scouting reports on all of these players in the next week or so, hopefully, and then we'll be able to check in on them again closer to the end of the offseason. And fortunately for me, there was an incredible scout out there, Isoroku Nakamura, outstanding at everything, highly favors tools. Now, again, I'm playing with 100% scouting accuracy, so not sure how much this even matters. But we've got everyone who's going to be going through a training program set to get scouting reports on them over the next week or so. And then as they complete those programs, we'll see what the coaches and the folks from the player development lab have to say, and also check in on their scouting reports. So we've simmed ahead a few days, and we can see a progress status from everybody. We've got some players who are frustrated. Carlos Rodon is excelling with his attempt to increase velocity, which is great. But a fair amount of guys who are frustrated or struggling with what we have suggested to them. I think in a perfect world, obviously you'd want everyone to be on track or excelling. It is kind of interesting here that like some of the easier ones we have, third baseman Roderick Arias in the minors, we have him trying to learn a new position. It was supposed to be relatively easy for him, but he's also frustrated. Doesn't look like he's got any significant personality quirks one way or another. Again, we're just kind of trying to learn this. But my thought there might be some correlation between the difficulty of the program and how the players were feeling about their progress. And there is to some extent, but in some situations, players are struggling with things that we thought were going to be pretty easy for them. So we've simmed ahead another couple of weeks, and you can see a lot of our players are frustrated with their development programs. That's probably a early indicator to me that those are likely to be unsuccessful or less successful programs when all is said and done. I do love that Rodon is excelling and potentially increasing his velocity. That would be very helpful. Should be only a couple of weeks now until some of the quicker programs, the base running fundamentals that we put Grisham on, the learn new position for Cabrera, improve pitcher defense for Stroman, and learn new position for Arias are finished up, and we hopefully get some feedback on how those programs went, and we'll find out whether or not I can use those slots for somebody else for a shorter program going forward, or whether the number of slots you have are just one use over the course of the off season. And we've gotten feedback on those shorter programs today. Looks like only one of them was successful. Trent Grisham, who was working on base running fundamentals. His program improved. We can see our full scouting report on the player scouting page. Yeah, unfortunately for us, there's not really the history of their base running ability here. But it sounds like it was positive development for Grisham, so I guess that's positive, particularly in the context of the others where there was no improvement from Cabrera, who is trying to learn a new position. They don't think he can play first base, and first base still doesn't even show up as an option for him. Tried to improve Stroman's defense again just because it was a quick one where we could see maybe quick results, so nothing there for him. And then Roderick Arias, they were hoping he might be able to become a right fielder, and that didn't happen either. And he does kind of have pretty interesting outfield abilities. I think I might throw him through the same program again just to see if maybe it goes a little differently. Let's see. We'll go back to the development lab and find out if now that we've finished those 4 programs, those slots are now open. And they are. So that makes sense. It would stink if you kind of use somebody on a shorter program that you waste that slot for the whole off season. Well, unfortunately, my thought of having Mr. Arias work on learning a new position again is not applicable since he's already attempted that. So apparently he can't attempt it again, at least this off season. Who knows going forward? And you can see here with the amount of time that most programs take, even though we had people on those short programs from the beginning of November, the only programs that can be completed are the ones that take about a month, month and a half. So does limit the ability of you to do kind of some of the more extensive programs if you don't get them started right away, which makes sense from a simple numerical perspective. Just something good to think about. You don't want to wait on the longer programs. Get them started as soon as the off season starts, obviously. And we've simmed ahead another month or so into January, and of the 4 new small short programs that we implemented, once again, 3 of the 4 were not successful. Gleyber Torres improving his base running fundamentals was the only one that apparently worked. Although if I remember correctly, I don't necessarily see any real changes there. I could be wrong. Actually, if I was looking carefully, I can see here this December, which was just a week or so ago, his current speed rating improved from 35 to 40. So there was some improvement there. I can't remember what his base running ability was before, but it seems like very small marginal improvement potentially there for Torres. Taking a look back at the lab, you can see that we are now 5 to 6 weeks out for all of the longer programs that we've started, and we've now got the opportunity to put 4 more players through shorter programs. And as we get ready for spring training to start, just concluded the last round of those 4 brief programs that we did with people. Once again, only 1 out of the 4 successful. Gleyber Torres is the guy who was successful once again. Don't know that his ratings necessarily are higher than they were the last time that we looked at him, but supposedly he has improved his base stealing technique. I guess if I did not have the 20 to 80 by 5 ratings up and running, that probably would have made sense to see a little more nuance in these ratings potentially as I'm doing this experiment here, but I'm making this up as I go along. But I think in retrospect, a more nuanced rating metric or measurement system would have made some sense. I'm assuming here there's going to be no programs that can be, actually no, it looks like we can still do another 4 to 5 week program for people, because I guess it is going to be running all the way through spring training, so that's good to know. We'll keep throwing programs here since I'm doing the 20. I kind of almost feel like the 6 that they suggest is probably a good amount. I would hope that as I get to know this better, my success rate gets higher than the 25% that it is. Although it is good that you can't just magically go and improve all your players and turn everyone into Babe Ruth or Roger Clemens by just sending them into a lab. I tend to think if I am playing going forward with a smaller number of lab spots, probably going to focus on the top prospects in my system, the best players on my team, and players that we have signed to long-term contracts who we know are going to be part of our organization for years to come. I think those are probably the 3 buckets of players I'd be most likely to try to send into the lab, but that's probably something that will also evolve as I get to understand this better and also hear thoughts from viewers as to how they're using this tool as well. And we've just heard back on a lot of those programs that we started back in November. You can see a lot of no improvements, but we have a successful, an outstanding, and a poor. So those will be interesting. Carlos Rodon, the velocity program, has improved, made changes to his mechanics, and a small but measurable increase in his velocity. Taking a look at his scouting report here, you can see we did think that we've added about 1 mile an hour to his velocity, so that was a successful program. Good to see that result. And fortunately, we got an outstanding result from Garrett Cole in terms of his ability to work on his slider. Sliders come leaps and bounds from where it was before, so that is good to know. We think his slider is 55 out of 55 now. I believe when we first started talking about this at the beginning of the episode, pretty sure it was 50 as far as that pitch. You can see since the end of the season, we think his stuff was here when we started this episode. I think we pointed out that it showed at 60, so it looks like he had a little blip downward before. So it's good that Cole's slider is better. He also has been losing a little bit of velocity, so that's certainly not optimal. And then speaking of it not optimal, Juan Soto had a poor conclusion here, working to improve his quality of contact. His focus on contact has worsened his patience at the plate, and now we're seeing him swing at more pitches outside the zone. So although we've had more success than not successful, I think this is a good warning, particularly with a player that we've signed to an extension and invested a ton of money in, to not push things. And you can see his eye has taken a step back here. We still think he's got that 80 eye potential that helped him lead the American League with 126 walks this year, but he has taken a step back. Only 70 out of 80 on his eye right now. So it's good that he's still got that 80 potential, and it probably can be improved and go back to where it was. His power rating also dropped off, and his overall rating dropped from 4.5 to 3.5 stars. So that was a program that does not seem to have worked very well. Fortunately, as I said, it seems like his potential in both of those areas is what it is before. So it's hopefully going to be a matter of some good coaching, getting him back to where he was. But I think a great example to not just kind of throw things willy-nilly out there. Austin Wells, successful with his plate discipline. Clay Holmes, successful with his control. Doesn't show anything here. Again, I don't necessarily have the most nuanced ratings profile. But fortunately, in commissioner mode with 100% accurate scouting, I can just switch it to a 1 to 100 rating system, and we can see that his control did go up by 1 point from all of that work that we had done with him. So not hugely consequential, but still certainly better than nothing. We also got an outstanding development from Edinson Duran on his 2-strike program. So he's improved his ability to avoid strikeouts as well as his potential ceiling as well. Take a look at the scouting report on him. And his potential contact rating increased from 53 to 60. Current contact up from 51 to 59. So that is pretty significant improvement there. So I think this is going to be a really cool new feature of the game. You can see most get no improvement. I think it's going to be something that you're going to want to be thoughtful and strategic in, particularly if you're not using 20 slots like I am, and I don't think I will be using 20 going forward. And clearly, you're going to want to avoid negative and poor results as much as possible, particularly with players that you're going to be playing $40 million a year to for close to a decade. I do appreciate, though, that, and you can see the more nuance here when we look at the 100 rating system for Soto, but a pretty significant decline in his power and his eye while he was going through that program. So it was very unsuccessful, all things considered. The only positive is that we do think he can get back to where he was. The question now, though, is at the age of 26, how easy is that going to be for him to do? So I think that the Player Development Lab is a really interesting feature to the game. It's going to kind of hopefully allow us to tweak the ratings on those players who would be a potential all-star if they just happen to not strike out as much, or could be a potential starting pitcher if they could just add a third pitch, could be a much better utility infielder if they improved their arm or their overall defensive prowess. So I think it's going to be an opportunity to really kind of customize things a bit more, take more of a proactive approach into player development than the traditional OOTP, which has largely been invest heavily in player development, invest heavily in a lot of coaches that are high quality coaches, and have players with good personalities, and then basically hope for the best. So I think that this new player development lab is going to allow a lot more customization, a lot more thought. Really looking forward to playing with it more in the coming weeks. The developmental training plan, I'm a little more torn on. I kind of get the concept. I don't really understand the ultimate impact that it's going to have. So I think for the time being, I'm just going to kind of largely default to the AI recommendations for the most part, and then maybe have a player or two that I really track closely where I make some real significant changes just to try to learn a little bit more about how this works. So if you're still with me at this point, thanks for watching. I know it's kind of been a rambling episode, as some of these things when I'm jumping into new features for the first time tend to be. But it was an interesting learning experience for me. Hopefully, if you haven't seen this aspect of the game before, it gives you some things to think about. And until our next episode, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.